IVM.
The Cred store has me hooked. Specially curated products from over 250 brands and the use of Cred coins to avail exclusive offers and deals across categories like food and beverages, electronics or home decor, etc. That means if you're buying electronics or home decor, it's a discount city. So don't miss out. Download the Cred app now. Folks, welcome to Paisa Vaisa, brought to you by Cred, the most rewarding credit card bill payments app. I'm your host, Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter. And on today's episode, we are talking about an interesting investment idea in lease finance. Totally new, first time on the show, Grip Invest. My guest, Nikhil Agarwal, founder and CEO, Grip Invest. And we're going to talk about his product right after this short Cred convenience break. We'll be right back.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With CoinSwitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are zero charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes CoinSwitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download CoinSwitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into a show about crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM podcasts. CoinSwitch, kuch to badlega.
And welcome back. Before I begin my guest, folks, standard disclaimer, please do your own research before investing. This is a podcast, not an advisory, not a recommendation of any sort. So guys, please do your own research and I'm sure Nikhil will also help you out. If you have any questions, we're here to answer that. Okay, so with that out of the way, Nikhil, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners.
Thanks so much, Anupam. Happy to be here.
Great. Let's get straight to it. What is Grip Invest all about? I like the name Grips. Like kind just grips your attention. Brief intro.
Thank you. Yeah,
and
sure.
Then we'll get into details.
Perfect. Let me start with why the name, right? We believe that investors wanted to have more control over what they're investing in, and hence the word grip, right? To be able to take control not only of your wealth, but also what it means in terms of having a control on your destiny. One of the reasons to also choose that name was because we wanted to focus on asset-backed investments, which gave people a grip on the security behind an investment. What GRIP offers is an opportunity to invest in assets which are not typically available to common investors. These are assets that have been available to family offices and HNIs, but there is a huge appetite and desire to diversify portfolios away from fixed income, fixed deposits, and mutual funds. And that is where GRIP is offering a unique opportunity to these investors. We offer two investment products, both with the idea of being asset-backed, fixed income, and corporate credit. One is lease financing and the other is inventory financing. To break it down, we allow investors to participate in opportunities where they purchase assets like vehicles, electronics, furniture, and provide it on a fixed contract to corporates, large corporates, early stage companies on a fixed rental and a fixed sort of exit value. This return for them provides them with attractive IRRs to close to about 20% on a pre-tax basis and allows them to diversify and add one more product to their investment portfolio.
I like that 20% IRR sound. So let's understand the concept, Nikhil. Lease finance.
Sure.
How does it work? Just if you can explain to our listeners at a conceptual level.
Yeah. Let me take an example and then draw the line to GRIP. All of us have rented a house sometime in our life, right? And lease or renting is almost an interchangeable word. The person who owns the house, the landlord, is the lessor. Okay, he is providing the house or the asset to you on a fixed term at a fixed cost for you to use for your residence, and you pay a certain amount of money. This is a standard lease or rent transaction. The finance provided to the landlord to purchase this asset and then provide it on lease is called lease financing. Again, to take the same example, the landlord would have probably taken a loan to buy the house. That finance enabled him to create this transaction, and that is what lease financing. Now, in our new economy, and this transition has been happening for the last 5 or 6 years, there is an increased move towards not buying assets, but to rent assets or to subscribe to assets. People don't purchase content, they subscribe to Netflix. You don't buy a car, you use an Uber or an Ola. At GRIP, we call these transactions micro leasing transactions because they can last from anywhere between 10 minutes to 1 hour to a month to a year, right? And they're micro leasing transactions. In our economy, everything is getting micro leased, and hence there is more demand for lease financing and leasing to occur. Now, what GRIP does is provide investors on our platform the option to finance the purchase of such assets, which can be leased to companies against a fixed rental. And that is the concept of lease financing.
Very interesting. So we already have NBFCs and banks and large organizations that do this. So why would companies take assets on lease from GRIP?
Sure. I think that's a very fair question. And there are a bunch of reasons, very, very varied reasons for doing this. One is largely banks as a policy do not lease in India. Okay. In Western markets, including and also in China, leasing is actually a very, very prominent form of providing capital. Just to give you a sense of the market, 30% of all physical assets produced in a country in West and in China are given on lease. In India, if you look at the capital formation of the country, for example, for the last couple of years, that is close to $1 billion in goods, right? 30% of all such goods would be leased if we were similar to other markets. However, in those countries, banks are the ones that are predominantly doing leasing. In India, banks don't lease. They only typically provide credit on a loan facility. The second thing that we have noticed, so one is a structural challenge. The other thing that we have noticed is that a lot of new age companies, new age businesses are coming about with different business models and different types of assets. Electric mobility is a great example of that, where the banks and NBFCs who have their typical credit models are still trying to wrap their head around the risk of an electric vehicle, right? Their typical bank models in terms of credit risk analysis don't necessarily fit into what electric vehicles mean. And hence their ability to provide capital to the space is very limited. Not just GRIP, but I think we are seeing this across the platform. There are new forms of credit that are emerging to meet the requirements of this new economy and these new products that are coming out. And GRIP is filling a void when it comes to such assets and such opportunities to provide capital. I would just conclude on this answer by saying our cost of capital or the cost of financing we provide is not very different from what you would get from a bank or an NBFC for similar risk profile of a company and the similar asset that you may take on loan. The only difference is our source of capital is different, and the way we look at some of the situations is different from a credit perspective.
Okay. So let's understand the product now, right? We've got the concept. We understood what GRIP is about. Let's get into this like step by step, right? So first question is, what is onboarding like? If I sign on a platform, how does that process go?
Sure. When you sign on, you have to do a simple OTP-based registration, and you are able to then see the various deals that are listed on our platform. The objective behind GRIP is to be an incredibly transparent platform and provide investors all the information that they require to make an investment. We are a discovery and transaction platform. We're not an advisory platform. And as you correctly mentioned in your disclaimer, investors should look at the details, should feel free to ask us questions and do their own research before making an investment. We try to provide a great summary of the investment options available, and the investor can then select the option. At the time of making the investment, the investor has to complete a KYC, which is a standard Aadhaar PAN card based KYC, and has to sign the investment agreements. There is a payment gateway that allows the payments to happen and the transaction goes through. So it's, from a transaction perspective, it's as simple as making an e-commerce transaction combined with the KYC and the agreement signing that is standard for any financial product.
Okay. Next step. So I've signed on. How does the process work, right? I mean,
Sure.
I'm actually investing in an asset. So, and I'm not the only guy, right? This is like pooling and waiting for the other guys to come in. So how long does it take for a deal to close? And do I know who the other investors are? How much percentage they've got, how much percentage I've got, anything out?
Yeah. I think this is the place where there's a lot of financial innovation that is being done by us and by many other startups. What we allow you to do is to choose an investment amount between 20,000 rupees and upwards. No one can invest more than 10% of the total deal value. Once you have made your investment, you will not know who are the other investors that you're co-investing with, but you will know what percentage of the total deal you have invested, and hence what is your economic share in the profit or the returns from the transaction. To have many people participate together, what we facilitate is a SPV for each transaction, or a special purpose vehicle, where these assets are purchased using the investor's capital. This SPV is set up in the form of a limited liability partnership. I'm sure many of your viewers are familiar with LLP, so I'll not get into that details. But each lease transaction is an individual LLP that we help set up for the investors. It's an entirely digital process in terms of onboarding, transaction, document signing, etc. And all investors for that transaction are part of the LLP. The advantages of this structure are quite a few, Anupam. One is it's a complete silo, right? You have chosen to invest in a particular deal and you are in a particular entity which has nothing, no other asset, no other liability. So your risks are very clearly demarcated. Second, the LLP owns the assets that you are leasing out, and hence you have very direct control over the asset and hence the grip on the assets. The same LLP is the one signing the lease agreement and receiving the money, and it has its own bank account. So the transaction flow, the money flow is super, super transparent. Finally, because of the LLP structure, we are able to take depreciation as an expense. We are able to claim GST credit, and any payment, any profit distribution from the LLP is not taxed in the hands of the investor, right? And hence allows for a more tax efficient structure along with playing for transparency and clarity to the investor. So that's the structure that allows people to co-invest and participate.
So we'll get into the details about the taxation because I find that really interesting later on in the show. Just to summarize and, kind of complete this part of our discussion. So now I own the asset, right? And if you can give a flavor to our listeners, what kind of assets I'm owning, just typically, is it a truck? Is it a house? Is it a warehouse? Is it whatever? And how do I get this lease income?
Understood. Okay. We have now done about, and by the time this podcast becomes live, we would have crossed the milestone of about 100 crores in assets that are deployed across the platform.
Wow.
Investors, about 4,500 investors who are currently participating on the platform have deployed this 100 crores and has gone into a wide variety of assets. There are obviously a few focus categories and I'll talk about that, but I'll also talk about the long tail of assets that we facilitate. Vehicles are the main form of assets, and this includes everything from a two-wheeler electric bike by a Hero, a Celerio from Maruti, heavy-duty trucks, three-wheelers made by electric vehicle manufacturers. It also includes a lot of equipment that are being provided inside warehouses for storage or forklifts that are used inside warehouses. We also have done machineries for manufacturing of apparel or shoes. On the FMCG side or the F&B side, we have also done a lot of equipment for cloud kitchens as well as co-living spaces such as stanza living. So there's a diverse pool of assets. Mobility and equipment for warehousing is one of our largest blocks of asset on that investors are currently participated in.
And the part about the lease income, how often, how do I get the lease income? Does it come into my bank? How does that work?
Understood. Every month, the lessee pays the lease income. This lease income comes into the LLP's account and then is distributed to the investors also on a monthly basis. So your investment is really, you're getting returns every 30 days. Today, an investor on Grip has two choices. Either the money can come directly to the bank account or it can come to a digital escrow for that investor on our platform. The digital escrow's advantage is that it allows them to reinvest money in subsequent deals at a click of a button. So those are the two options that they have.
Okay. What happens at the end of the lease?
Sure. At the end of the lease, typically our lease terms are about 24 months to 36 months. If you think about the kind of assets we're leasing, this is significantly shorter than the life of the asset, which means they still have more value, more economic life to give. Not just on our platform, but typically across lease transactions, the lessee ends up because they still find value in their ecosystem for the asset. We provide the lessee with the option to buy back the asset at a defined price and often at a very subsidized price to the initial value of the asset, right? Because you've already paid for the lease. We've also entered into agreements with many other companies who are potential buyers of this asset at the end of the lease. So we have a very clear view on what value the asset will be sold at. And that value is also paid out to investors as a lump sum residual value at the end of the lease term.
So I'm going to split the next question into two parts here, Nikhil, right? Pre and post, right? First, pre, as in what kind of due diligence do you guys do? Because that's a process that you undertake, for which I'm sure you'll charge, fees, and we'll get into that in the second part of this episode. And post, right? Or rather during this, despite all the due diligence that you do, if during the period of lease, what happens in case of a default?
Sure. Okay. We think of diligence as being three components. The first one I like to call the niyat diligence, because ultimately, if the niyat is right, a lot of things get solved for, right? Niyat of the counterparty. And you're basically checking for the quality of the founder, the kind of corporate governance in the company, and the likelihood and the intention of being able to repay the lease amount. Okay? The founder of the company or the management of the company, a equity investor, either a venture capital or private equity fund, which is part of that transaction, which ensures a certain degree of corporate governance. Okay? They must have worked for institutions like MNCs, gone to good colleges, have shown certain professional track record for us to qualify them as viable leases. The second diligence is financial due diligence, which is very similar to what any bank, NBFC would do in terms of looking at the historical financials, the month-on-month MIS, the liability side, both current, long-term, as well as future projections of the company. As a creditor, right, ultimately we are taking a credit risk. As a creditor, what we are most concerned about is the ability of the company to meet our monthly payments for the next 24 to 36 months. And the key check we do is, if the company is profitable, will it sustain that profitable margin? And if it's not profitable, does it have the cash on its balance sheet to sustain the payments? The final check we do is on the asset itself. That's our security. And hence we want to make sure the asset is purchased from a viable OEM, for example, a Hero Motors, Tata Motors, right? From a vehicle perspective, because automatically these assets have a better chance of survival for that lease term and for being able to be sold in the secondary market. So those are the three tests that we do. Linking this question to your second part, which is what happens during the lease term. The way we see credit is that there is no one way to protect the credit risk of an investor. There's no one shot that you can do. You have to build as many buffers as possible to ensure that capital is protected for an investor. And that's the approach that we have taken at Grip. I'll break it into 5 components and how we think about risk management. The first, obviously, is the diligence that we have spoken about. The second step is a security deposit. So for each transaction, a leasee will pay us 10 to 25% of the asset value as an upfront security deposit. So from an investor's perspective, that capital is already protected, right? Think of it as a LTV ratio for a loan. You've already covered for that in terms of the cash deposit. The third step is accelerated repayments. Typically, 3% of the asset value is returned every month in the form of lease payments. Okay, 3% multiplied by 12 months is basically 36%. Add the security deposit, and you're looking at 50% of your capital coming back within the first 12 months. Right. So a large part of your capital is recovered within the horizon of time that you can have a good view on. If you extend that for 18 months, you're recovering close to 70% of your capital. So that's the third step. The fourth step is obviously agreeing with the company on residual value. Right. What will you purchase the asset at? And to make sure that the company monitor the company on a month-on-month basis to make sure that there are no yellow flags or red flags about their performance and likelihood of default. We take monthly financials from each of our leases and make sure that we track the health of each of the companies. And in case a preventive action needs to be taken, we are well in the know. The final step, the fifth step, is to enter into partnerships with companies that may be able to do logistics, warehousing, and sale of these assets in the case of a default. We've built about 5 or 6 partners who can help us across the board to make sure that the risk of the asset is covered. The final part of this is because we have a focus in certain types of assets, vehicles and warehousing, we are often able to see redeployment opportunities between our portfolio. One company may return the asset, but the same asset is being used somewhere else, and we are able to redeploy it. This is how we think about risk management. Some of these measures may fail, but unlikely that all measures fail. And hence, we believe that the capital of an investor becomes more and more protected.
Have you had any defaults so far?
Fortunately, no. We are on 0 default, 0 delay payments. But I always tell the team that biggest caveat is we're a young portfolio, right? And hence, we need to wait for the next maybe 12 months. And if we are still at 0 default, we should pat ourselves on the back. But we should hold off any celebration today. The second thing is we need to constantly, the more you do, the less it is for preventing defaults, right? And there is so much more to be done even in terms of financial innovation to protect defaults. Can we create an FLDG option? Can we create an NPA reserve? How can we protect? And we're obsessed about solving for that. Okay. Hopefully some of this obsession will play out and we will continue to keep our NPAs low, but it would be naive for us to believe that we will not have defaults. We will have defaults. We need to know how to manage it.
Yeah. My question was, when did you start? And did you go through, you've been through this, 18, man, I have no idea how long this pandemic has lasted. But anyway, you've done this entire period. So you've done this, right? Yeah.
So we started in the first pandemic. We started in June 2020. So it's been about 15, 16 months of operations. We've gone through 2 pandemics in that sense, right? The first or not 2 pandemics, 2 lockdowns in that sense. The first lockdown, second lockdown. I would say we got lucky because, we started after the lockdown had already happened and we put that filter on all our decision making. So we picked companies who would actually benefit from a lockdown, right? For example, last mile logistics and warehousing have seen an exponential growth in the last 18 months. And we picked those bets that helped us grow. I think it also allowed us to sort of set the mindset in the organization that we need to always keep this filter on. There may always be a pandemic. There may always be a lockdown, and we needed to take that criteria into decision making. I think we've been fortunate in that sense to have that always in the back of our minds.
Good to know. So, folks, we're going to get even deeper into the Grip product right after this break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this Cred convenience break. We will talk about the nitty-gritty of Grip Invest.
If you're a cricket fan, check out Edges and Sledges, India's favorite cricket podcast.
The podcast focuses on Indian cricket, the IPL, and has a ton of banter both on and off the field.
We talk about the week's biggest cricket stories with current and ex-international cricketers, coaches, or sometimes just between us.
And it's hosted by me, DJ.
Me, Varun.
And me, Ashwin.
New episodes release every week.
You can catch us on the IVM Podcast's website, app,
or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.
And welcome back to this episode. Nikhil, let's understand SPV, right? I mean, all of us are used to buying stocks directly. You buy you buy equity through a broker, it comes in my name. You buy mutual funds, it comes in my name. What is SPV? And why, because here I'm becoming what? A partner or a director, whatever. Just explain that and why you've chosen this.
Got it. A little bit of a backstory. So in 2014, SEBI came out with a very forward-looking paper on crowdsourcing platforms in India. It was on the back of US, UK, many other countries actually passing regulations to enable crowdsourcing to happen, which basically enabled retail investors, individual investors, to pool together money for deploying capital in various use cases. Okay? Unfortunately, the SEBI 2014 paper never converted into regulation. It was a discussion paper invited for suggestion, which means today that there is very little in the way of a structure under the SEBI platform that allows for investments to happen in small ticket size for such kind of opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, these opportunities of lease financing, inventory financing, bill discounting, revenue-based financing, right? A lot of these products that we are seeing today have always been available to family offices who are ready to write large checks. But there was a need to provide this at a smaller ticket size. One of the framework that does exist, which allows this to happen, is a LLP structure. A special purpose vehicle in the form of an LLP. Ultimately, Anupam, you and I, if we are investing 20,000 or 30,000, can't take a fractional ownership of a bike or a truck, right? There has to be an entity who is the registered owner of that vehicle, of that asset. And to create that entity and pool money, we need a vehicle. That vehicle is our LLP or limited liability partnership and the SPV. My sense is that over a period of time, some of that regulation will become even more clearer. P2P regulations is a great example, right? There's a very, very clear framework and a new framework now in place to enable that to happen. I believe a lot of given the growth in crowdsourcing platforms, SEBI, RBI will work and create the framework that is available. The current framework that we apply comes under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and enables us to do this in a manner that protects the interest of the investor. To the second part of your question, yes, a investor today becomes a partner or an ordinary partner in an LLP. It is different from being a director because directors under the Companies Act significant obligations to managing the company. A partner has no such obligations. There is also the consideration of a designated partner, which is like a director of an LLP. Those roles are taken by GRIP's management team in terms of ensuring corporate governance, compliance from an LLP's perspective. So the investor has minimum obligations. His liability is capped to the total amount of his investment, and he's able to get the economic returns without any of the liability of running an LLP.
Very interesting. Now let's get this big elephant in the room and talk about it, right? Because anybody who's listening to this would have heard you saying 21% IRR. Anybody who Googles Grip, will see that number very widely displayed. Yeah. But I like the fact that on your blog, you've got a very interesting post. So folks, note to you, please go to the Grip Invest blog and read this post that they put out there that differentiates between IRR, return on investment, and CAGR. Okay. Now, if you're an equity person like me, all you know is CAGR. You bought a stock in 2000, whenever, and you sold it now and you've got a nice looking CAGR. IRR is different. ROI is different. Nikhil, all yours. Take it away. Let's explain this.
Thank you for highlighting that. And I'll spend a minute just taking the summary of that blog, right? Because IRR is a term that, as you correctly mentioned, very few people use and hence understand. The basic concept of IRR is to give time value of money. To say that 100 rupees earned tomorrow is more valuable than 100 rupees earned after a week, right? It's still 100, but the timing of that return is very important. And IRR takes that into consideration. When you think about investments which give you a bullet repayment, okay, IRR is not a valid concept. It's a suboptimal concept. It can still be used, but it's suboptimal. But when you think about returns which come to you every month, right? the timing of that returns becomes very important because it's coming frequently. In a lease payment or a lease structure, that is exactly what is happening. Your returns come every month and give you the option to actually reinvest it or use it somewhere else and hence compound your returns. Hence, we use IRR as the default metric for reporting our investments. And investors should use that to make their decision on evaluating options, not only on GRIP, but anything that gives this kind of income. The same returns, when looked at on a yield basis, actually give a false impression because you're not choosing to reinvest that money. Now let's talk about the 21% number, right? It seems really high. It seems that, this is esocentric and, like really out of their products for being investing must be really high risk, right? I'll come back to terms that maybe everyone can relate to. A 21% IRR effectively means that the company who is leasing is paying an interest cost of anywhere between 13 to 16%, okay? Which is not abnormal, which is what you would get if you went to an NBFC to finance assets today, okay? And hence, we are providing the same cost of capital that other banks or NBFCs are providing to these companies. The only difference is that we are not quoting in the form of interest, yield, ROI, CAGR, but in terms of IRR because of the time value of money. The other difference, which is less important, but I'd like to highlight it and we can link it to a discussion on taxation as well, is a concept of GST. Unlike a loan where there is no GST, a lease income or a lease transaction has a component of GST. And I'm happy to park that thought, but this is an important consideration into why IRRs are 21%. Just to summarize, IRR is a different concept. It's not the same thing as interest rate. It is equivalent to a 14 to 16% interest cost for a company. And the ability to have GST component increases the IRR, which is again something that is not typical of a loan transaction.
Let's get into that. You've basically given me the intro to the next question. So all yours, okay. Because here I become a partner and an owner of the asset, right? Correct. So I get benefits also. The Income Tax Act allows me those benefits. Let's get into it.
Perfect. So there are two benefits. I'll pick the GST first because we touched upon it, and then I'll come to the second one. When you purchase an asset today, any asset, we all pay GST. Now, the premise of GST is that if you're using this asset for something else, this becomes an input GST. Okay? Let's assume that we bought a Maruti car and the car was worth 5 lakh rupees. We paid a 20% GST on it. Okay? So 1 lakh rupees in GST. This 1 lakh is an input for any other GST expense I have to make. When you lease the Maruti car out, you will earn a lease income, which is also subject to GST. So the lessee pays you, say, 2,000 rupees a month and the GST on component on it. However, because you have this input credit, you don't actually have to pay the GST amount to the government, right? It's a set off against the output GST. Absolutely a provision under the income tax law. Nothing special being done here, no special sauce, just the nature of how a lease transaction is structured. And hence, the transaction becomes positive or more beneficial because of this input credit that we have from a GST perspective and increases the cash flow to the investor. In the case of interest, there is no GST component and hence the same does not apply. The second advantage from a tax perspective is depreciation. Anupam, as you mentioned, you're the owner of the asset and hence the SPV claims depreciation as an expense. Any expense reduces the profit. Any profit reduces the taxation, right? Because depreciation is a non-cash expense, right? It's not a cash expense. So it reduces your taxation without reducing the cash available for distribution. Okay? And hence, the benefit of GST from a cash perspective, depreciation from a cash perspective further leads to increased returns on a cash basis to investors. Okay? Those are the two reasons that further add up to us being able to deliver a higher IRR to investors.
And all this is handled at the SPV level and I get the pass-through benefit in the end, or do I have to do all of this stuff with my chartered accountant in my income tax return?
The LLP structure is, in that sense, was designed in a way that the partner has to do nothing or the investor has to do nothing. All of this is done at the LLP level, and we have managed this through technology and through certain processes to happen for all the SPVs that we have created. The partner receives or the investor receives a post-tax return, okay, after taking account all of these benefits, and they do not have to pay any further tax on it. Okay? A lot of people who are not familiar with LLPs will think about dividend distribution tax, right, which we typically see in private limited companies or public limited companies. LLPs do not have dividend distribution tax. Okay? So whatever you receive from the LLP is completely tax exempt because the tax is already paid and there is no double taxation that happens. As an investor, you do have to file your returns. So you have to disclose that this income came to you, but you do not need to pay any further tax on And all of this calculation is done at the LLP's end. So no one has to be bothered by it. No one has to hire a CA to do this. This is just disclosure that we provide to explain to investors what happens in the background. We've also made a policy of sharing the financials of each LLP on our platform, right? So investor knows this is how the cash came in, this is what the deductions happened, and hence I am very clear and it's transparently presented to me on what my returns are.
Very interesting. So you're saying that this will go under income from other sources on my income tax return, right?
Income from business sources.
Okay, so this will go from and profit. Yeah. Okay, so this goes as business income on my income tax return, and you'll give me. I'll probably get a Form 26 or something, which will help me show that there's TDS out here.
Yeah, so you will get a declaration from us which says that this has been deducted. Because the LLP has filed the tax, you do not have to pay any tax on this. This is the amount you must disclose as profits made in this financial year. That's
and just disclose it and that's it. So what I'm getting in my hand every month after month is essentially I don't have to pay any tax on that.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. I've just one question slipped my mind. What are the costs out here? I mean, do you charge me anything? How do I pay that to you?
Yeah, we've designed a cost structure which aligns our interest with the investor's interest. We typically take a 2% fees from the investor, but not upfront. There is no entry load. We take it as 2% of the lease income earned every month. Okay, which means that if 100 rupees comes into the LLP as lease income, we will deduct 2% of that, and the remaining 98 will be passed on to the investor. The reason to do this is that our fees is only earned if you fully get your returns back. Right? If there is a default, our fees disappears as well. Okay? And hence we have fully aligned ourselves to the interest of the investor. That is the only cost of the transaction. All the other costs of creating the structure, managing it, etc., is covered within our 2% fees.
Very interesting. So the 21% IRR that you quote on your website or whatever the number is net of fees.
Is net of fees.
Fantastic. Okay. So say, in your view, what kind of an investor are you looking at? Or to ask it in a very simple way, what kind of investor is ideal, for GRIP, or is GRIP ideal for the other way around? Sorry.
Sure. We spend our time talking to a lot of people. We have about 80,000 registered investors on the platform. And I would say that we encourage people who have certain profiles to try our product out. Okay? We would encourage people who have had some experience in investing in financial products. GRIP should not be your first investment. Okay, we're very clear about it. You should have invested in fixed deposits. You should have done stock markets, maybe even corporate bonds if that is your appetite. And then you should look at investing in products like GRIP. Okay? Which means most of our users are typically above 25. So 25 to 40 is the typical age of our users. We also encourage people who have a certain level of income or a certain wealth portfolio, because this is a diversification strategy. It is not your core asset strategy, right? Typically, we see people who have incomes above 10 lakh rupees per annum or equivalent wealth as being the investor on our platform. I don't think there is too much other criteria from an investor perspective. We encourage people to diversify, not just in terms of adding GRIP to their portfolio, but even within GRIP, investing across multiple asset opportunities, multiple leasing opportunities. And we have actually seen that happen quite successfully. I'll happy to share some metrics around it, but that has worked very well for us as well. What has been super interesting to us is that we now have investors from about 42 countries and about 322 cities investing on the GRIP platform. Okay?
NRIs can apply.
NRIs can do. NRIs can invest using their NRO funds, onshore funds, India funds. But yes, we get a lot of NRI investments, no foreign investments. And most of the investors come typically from tier 1 cities and are very digitally savvy, right? Because this is investing a sum of money on a completely digital platform. That's typically the profile of our user.
What kind of ticket sizes are we talking about out here? Like if I come on, do you have a minimum? Do you have a maximum? Yeah. How does that work?
So minimum is 20,000 per transaction, and the maximum is 10% of the total transaction value. Okay? What we typically see happening on Anupam is that investors' transaction size is about 80,000 rupees. Okay? So while the minimum is 20,000, people invest much higher, and average transaction size is 80K. As I mentioned, we also encourage people to build a diversified portfolio. So invest multiple times. 42% of our users are already on their second investment, and 12% are already on their fifth investment. Typically, the fifth investment happens within 100 days of joining the platform. So we see a very, very high repeat rate on the platform. As a result, a investor's portfolio on a platform who has spent about 6 months is about 2.5 lakh rupees.
Interesting. So on the flip side, asking a very safety and hygiene question for our listeners, because I'm sure, as you agree that with new investments or with this new form of investment, there's always this question in the back of the mind, especially when it comes to financial products. What happens if Grip shuts down? Mere paise ka kya hoga? What will impact? How does that impact? Because God forbid that should not happen to you, of course. But you've got 4,500 investors. You've hit 100 crores, and the way you're growing, I'm sure that this will only grow larger and larger. Right. So what happens then? I don't think you're an NBFC, right? I mean, you wouldn't be that. So what happens in that case?
Coming back to the one more benefit of LLP and SPV is that even if Grip shuts down, that entity has a life beyond us, right? Irrespective of us. That LLP is managed by Grip, but is not part of the Grip ecosystem, right? It's not owned by Grip. It's owned by the investors. And hence, even if our business was to shut down, the LLP would survive. It is an independent functioning corporate entity with its own bank account, own registration, and its independent lease agreements with the lessee. Okay? So the risk of Grip does not pass on to the investor. We've already talked about the risk mitigation of a deal, so I won't get into that piece. But each of these entities then becomes separate. What I can add from a corporate perspective is that we've recently raised our Series A round. We've gotten some great venture capital companies who have invested about 21 crores in the business. And hence, as a business, we are well capitalized. None of this money is being used to invest in the deals, right? This is all being used for sustaining our core business and our core platform. And hence, that's probably one more layer of comfort to investors.
Right. And just to recap, people might be thinking, we of course mentioned this in the first part of the episode, but just to recap to our listeners, in case the deal goes bad, we've leased a truck to someone and the guy is not able to repay the lease. I mean, he just vanishes. I can repossess the truck and sell it, and that's how we recover. Is that how it would work theoretically?
Theoretically, yes, and maybe I can add some levels of detail to it. Grip, as part of its responsibility, will act on behalf of the investors to recover the truck. As I mentioned, we monitor each of our leases every month. So we would like to preempt the situation where the default is going to happen and recover our asset. Now we have 2-3 actions of recourse. One is obviously you enter into a settlement with the lessee and say, okay, you're not able to pay this. Is there a value we can settle the transaction at? Standard settlements. Second is to redeploy the asset to another of our lessee. Right? There are so many we have about 40 companies we lease to. A lot of the companies take the same asset from the same manufacturer. Can we just redeploy it? And the third is, can we sell the asset in a secondary market? Right? So these are the 3 options that Grip on behalf of the investors will undertake, and whatever value is received will be passed on to the investor.
Fantastic. Where can we reach out to you? Where can I listen? Because I'm sure I've tried to cover as many questions as I can, but I know that my listeners are much smarter than me. So, if they have any questions, where do they go? What do they do?
Sure. We're at gripinvest.in. Investors can feel free to check out our website. As soon as they register, each of them will be assigned a relationship manager, an individual relationship manager, and they are able to contact that RM for any questions they have. They can also write to us at support@gripinvest.in, and we'll be happy to answer the questions. We're obviously on all the main social media platforms, so you can reach us at LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at our respective handles, and the team will get back to you to answer any questions that you do have.
Fantastic, man. What's new? What do you guys have? Because the way that you're growing and the idea that you've got, and people are, the whole don't buy, always rent, or always lease, that entire thing is so strong these days. What are your plans? Any new products lined up?
So we didn't spend a lot of time talking about inventory financing, which is definitely something we started piloting about a month back. I think it's an interesting product because it has a much shorter tenure. It's a 3 to 6 month tenure. And so for people who are looking for a short term to park their money, that becomes an interesting opportunity for them to look at. The returns are, if I was to quote it in yield, it's an 11 to 12% annualized yield. So it's an attractive return from that perspective for a short-term product. We're definitely looking to add 1 or 2 more products in the next 6 months. Same focus, asset-backed, fixed income, corporate credit, right? That will be a defining theme for the investment opportunities that we do. The second part of the initiatives is we are all about the user journey, right? What can we do to deliver them a great investment experience for products such as ours, both in terms of the ease of the transaction as well as mitigating risk. And I see there's a lot of scope for financial innovation. We've talked about this on mitigating risk. We're working with some of the largest, I would say, NBFCs, credit funds, to see what we can do in terms of a credit default insurance, FLDG, NPA reserves, to keep mitigating that risk. At the same time, we really want to improve the user experience. We recently launched our digital wallet. We are launching auto invest options, which allow people to set auto invest criteria and compound their returns. So there are many more initiatives on that side that we're looking to lead.
No chance of real estate. I mean, there's fractional. I mean, what you're saying is essentially fractional ownership. Here
Yeah.
I'm becoming a partner, and the entire structure there is just waiting to be. And actually a lot of people are doing it.
Yes.
On the real estate side, I've been lucky to have some of them on my show as well. What about real estate?
I would say very tempted, but we want to get into something that we understand. And real estate is maybe a slightly different animal. We would love to see how we can maybe partner with some of these platforms to enable and to use their leverage and their expertise to identify the right transactions and then enter into that space where we can bring our investors also the option to invest in real estate. Real estate, fractional real estate transaction sizes are still very large, 25 lakh rupees, right? And that obviously cuts out 99% of the population. The question is, how can you make those same returns and those same opportunities available at a lower transaction size? And I think that's what we're trying to figure out. Then how we partner with some of these platforms which are doing a great job, like a Starta or a PropShare, etc., I think would be very interesting for us.
Interesting. Nikhil, before we wind up, I want you to answer one question. Now this entire leasing, renting, whatever it is, it's now available across a lot of asset classes.
Yes.
You're offering for assets, inventory, someone is offering fractional ownership. In real estate, someone is doing invoice discounting. So for, say, your ticket size, let's leave aside real estate, okay? Because I think that's a totally different animal. But for someone who's offering a similar product as yours, okay, could be invoice discounting, could be anything, right? Where he's saying that, put in the minimum is 20,000 and your IRRs can be whatever, 10, 15, 20, whatever the number is. What would be your checklist, right? I mean, what would you be telling people that look out for point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4 before you put your money, right? Whatever that money be. Today you're putting 20,000, tomorrow it might be 1 lakh, right? The amount increases as you've seen in your own case. What would you tell these people if you have to give a checklist?
I think the first checklist would be the platform that you're investing in. Do you feel comfortable investing, right? Do you get a sense of comfort on investing on them? Because the first risk you're taking is actually the platform risk, okay? Because whatever done and said, you are relying on this platform to do some of the exercise for you, some of the curation for you, right? The diligence for you. So first, is this platform credible, right? Have some of your friends invested on it? Have they got returns on time? Is there transparency on the platform? Are you able to get answers that they want, that you want on the platform? Have they built robust processes in terms of payment transactions? Are they working with the right payment processor or a bank to process your returns? Are those structures in place? I think that's the first check to do. Even, for example, is this company VC funded, right? Because then automatically some of those checks have already been done for you. Second is that, do you understand the product that you're investing in? Okay. For example, and with nothing else, crypto, right? I think a lot of people don't understand crypto as well. Leasing, I think, is intuitive. You can understand leasing and real estate, but crypto is something you don't understand. NFTs, right? Do you understand the product? Because if you don't understand the product, you definitely don't understand the risk. Okay, so make sure you figure it out. The third is, make sure you spend enough time reading the particular investment you're investing behind. And fourth and most important checklist is start with an amount that you are ready, you will not lose your sleep over. Experience the product for a certain amount of time, 6 months, 1 year, that depending on the kind of tenure of the project, and then think about reinvestment. Okay? Do not jump in completely into any of these platforms. Start small and build your portfolio as you build trust over time. I think these are the 4 big things I would look for.
Just why not P2P, Nikhil? I mean, seems just right down your alley. You guys have considered it, or you have some concerns, or you will do it?
I think that, let me say, I'm not qualified enough to say that I'm concerned or not. A lot of the P2P guys, for example, LaneDein, Faircent, we speak to very closely. And I think some of them are doing great stuff, right? They've even, especially with now the partnership they have with Cred or BharatPe, they're doing some very interesting stuff on the distribution side. I think that's an interesting product. It's its own animal, right? It's retail credit risk. I think you need to play to your strengths. Our strength is looking at corporate credit, and hence we want to focus on secured corporate credit or asset-backed corporate credit as a theme, and that should remain our focus. We'll do a better job if we remain focused. So that's how we think about it currently. No one's seen what happens, 5 years out. I think you need to stop predicting. It's just in this how fast things are changing. It's difficult to look at those, but there is no current ambition to get into P2P lending. We want to remain focused on asset-backed fixed income corporate credit.
Very interesting, and I hope that I can have you back on the show once you've launched newer products, folks. it's what this episode has probably gone on for more than 45 minutes, 1 hour, and so we're pushing toward the end. But you know what? I love it. I just love it. I love when we can talk about new concepts about money. I love it when we push, the stuff beyond stock market, mutual funds, and all that, which are of course very important. And if you're a listener to Paisa, you already know that we love doing all these very different episodes. So Nikhil, thank you so much, man. You spent almost an hour of your time taking all our questions. Folks, the product is Grip Invest, GRIP. All your questions, please give it straight to Nikhil or to the website, their social media. They have a lot of posts on their blog, on their website, which should pretty much explain whatever you need to know. But that's a wrap on this episode of Paisa. My guest, Nikhil Agarwal, founder and CEO of Grip. Nikhil, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners.
Thanks, Anupam. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
And now the CRED privilege tip of the week, folks. Understand your income tax return. Okay, there's a good chance that you've got a CA filing, or maybe you're doing it yourself, or maybe you're giving it to a website, whatever. Just, it's a lot of fun. I know it's also a lot of, it's also a bit complicated, but understand the components of your income. Okay, this is salary income, this is income from other sources, this is profit and gains from business or profession and all that stuff. Understand the tax slabs and the deductions that you have. Okay, this will help you a lot throughout the year. Sometimes maybe you're due for advance tax payments, right? 15th of every quarter. Maybe you missed that. But if you know how your income is panning out over a year, this will help you time that better and save on any penalty on paying your taxes late. So there's your tip of the week, folks. Understand your income tax return. And listeners, if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm your host, Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter. Thank you, folks, for listening to Paisa, brought to you by CRED, the most rewarding credit card bill payments app.
No material on the show should be considered as financial advice. The material on the show is for informational purposes only. Please consult a financial advisor before taking any investment decision.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Raw and Organic, Kunal is joined by Divyanka Bedi, aka Gigi. She's the owner of a fitness studio called The Space in Mumbai. They discuss how the pandemic changed everything and how to start building a community. One of our favorite shows, The Habit Show, completes 3 years and 600 episodes. Congratulations to Ashton and the rest of his team. Good habits lead to consistency. Ashton clearly has them. 3 years and 600 episodes is an amazing achievement. In the world of Simplified, Chuck, Naren, Shriketh, and Tony try to find out how distressing it is for billionaires to be taxed on their income. On All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk unpack the findings of the National Family Health Survey. And on Paisa, Anupam talks to Preeti Khurana. She's the Director of Advocacy and Regulation at Clear, and they discuss filing your income tax return. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And also do check out our YouTube channels. We have a number of them. You can get them on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And remember, if you're enjoying this show, or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. It really does help us spread the word. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors for the network this week: CRED, Bank of Baroda, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Intel, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Do you like true crime stories?
Do you like to learn about the people behind some horrible, awful crimes?
More specifically, women that may have committed these crimes.
Actually, Indian criminals that are women?
Then we'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Misconduct. My name is Raghavi.
And I am Nisha.
We cover themes like murder, dacoity, drug trafficking, financial fraud, kidnapping, and many more.
You can catch us every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcast.